It's a holy city for three religions and really is one of the most important cities in our world history. As such, it is a big prize during this world war, and this week, Jerusalem surrenders to the British. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the largest man-made explosion to this point in history rocked Halifax, Nova Scotia, when a munitions ship and a relief ship collided. The Allied Supreme War Council met for the first time to discuss plans for 1918. The Battle of Cambrai came to an end on the Western Front. The Austrians took thousands of Italian prisoners in Italy, and in the Middle East, the advancing British took Hebron. And what they were advancing towards was Jerusalem, which they reached this week. In fact, Jerusalem surrendered the 9th. That morning, two British cooks saw a group coming towards them with a white flag. It was the city's dignitaries, the mayor, priests, rabbis, imams with the keys to the city. The Ottoman army had left, north to Nablus and east to Jericho and the River Jordan. British commander Edmund Allenby did not enter the city until the 11th, and he did so as specifically ordered by London, on foot and with no Allied flags flown over the city. With a guard of fewer than 150 troops, he passed through the Mount Zion part of the city. At the base of the Tower of David, his proclamation was read, assuring the people that the sanctity of the holy places will be respected. It was in English, French, Arabic, Russian, Hebrew, and Greek. The British offensive over on the Western Front may have ended last week, but British minds were still very much focused there. Sir Auckland Geddes, Minister of National Service, now warns the War Cabinet in London that with Russia pulling out of the war, the Germans will be able to transfer 900,000 men to the Western Front, giving them a superiority there of 11 divisions. And when they move their artillery, they will have an advantage over the Anglo-French forces of 2,000, with 4,000 in field guns and howitzers. The 12 American divisions coming into the line in 1918 would reverse this and give the Allies a slight advantage. But Geddes was adamant that 1 million new soldiers must come from Britain for any offensives to be successful. Men would have to come from the munitions factories and shipyards and be replaced by women or men who could not serve. And to make things a bit fairer for those who went to war, the tax levied on those who made profits in business or industry as a result of the war would be raised from 40 to 80%. Now, post-revolutionary Russia had stopped fighting in the war last week, and soon negotiations were going to begin for a peace treaty between Russia and the Central Powers. Let's talk about such a treaty for a minute. Obviously, the decision of the Bolsheviks to pursue peace is a huge concern to the Allies. There were some people that thought this justified intervention against the new Russian government. But the Allied governments didn't really share this view. The Bolshevik position on the war might be diametrically opposed to theirs, but there were good reasons to engage the new regime rather than simply oppose it. First off, the Allied nations had a bunch of commercial links already during Tsarist Russia, and there were good economic reasons for not taking action that might provoke retaliation against those interests. There were also large numbers of Allied citizens in Russia whose safety may be at risk if the Allies openly opposed the Bolsheviks. Of course, the opposition, the White Russians, had already begun to coalesce by now, and the sheer size of Russia meant that the Bolsheviks were not and would not be anytime soon in control of the whole country. To some Allied politicians, it made sense to try to not alienate the Bolsheviks on the chance that the Eastern Front might again become active, while at the same time giving aid to their opposition within Russia. There was also the Czech Legion, who were now trapped in Russia but wanted to continue the war. Intervention could certainly help them to leave so they could eventually be deployed on the Western Front. And the Allies were sympathetic towards the Baltic states and the Poles, who all wanted independence, but would have to overcome the fact that much of their possible homelands were under Russian control. So how do you intervene to help that work out? The situation was far from cut and dried. But the Soviet government, by this week, controlled 28 provincial capitals as well as all the industrial centers. They introduced the 8-hour day for railway workers and created the Commissariat of Public Education, which ended the monopoly on such education formerly held by the Russian Orthodox Church. Also, now on the 11th, they banned the Constitutional Democratic Party, the Cadet Party, and ordered its leaders arrested as enemies of the people. They also postponed the meeting of the Constituent Assembly until January, citing technical difficulties. Elections had been held near the end of November for the Assembly, and more than 60% of the people with the right to vote had voted. But sorting the results out was a tricky thing. The size of the country, the World War, the beginnings of a civil war, a failing communication system, these all made it really hard to figure out. Still, by this time it was becoming clear that the Bolsheviks were not only not going to have a majority, they weren't going to be close to the largest party. As it would turn out, they got between 20 and 25% of the vote, and the Socialist Revolutionaries got around 40%. The Bolsheviks were big winners in the cities and among the soldiers in the West, but the peasantry made up 80% of the Russian population and did not go their way. This did not sit well with Lenin and company. 2 weeks from now, Lenin's thesis on the Constituent Assembly will be anonymously published in Pravda and states that the Soviet Republic is a higher form of democracy than the usual bourgeois republic with its Constituent Assembly. Lenin argues that the interests of this revolution stand higher than the formal rights of the Constituent Assembly, and attempts to consider the question of the Constituent Assembly within the framework of ordinary bourgeois democracy would be a betrayal of the proletariat's cause and the adoption of the bourgeois standpoint. So, the elections did not really represent the will of the workers, according to him. In a way, he does have a point. The Socialist Revolutionaries, who got 40% of the vote, were by now split into anti-Bolshevik right and pro-Bolshevik left, and the election results had not reflected that split, but it just counted their votes in total. The rights were a big majority, but still, if say a quarter of the Socialist Revolutionary votes were actually for the pro-Bolshevik left, then the Bolsheviks would have maybe won a majority. Lenin proposed new elections and for the Soviet government to run things until then. Many people saw this as a prelude to suppressing the assembly. I guess we'll just have to wait and find out what happens in January. As a footnote here, one source, the chronology of the Great War, which is a fairly reliable source, but still only one, says that on December 11th, the assembly did meet in Petrograd, but was dispersed the 13th by Bolshevik troops. I'm inclined to disbelieve this, since that would have been a huge deal and big enough for other sources to write about, but I thought I'd mention it anyhow. That section of the chronology was originally published back in 1919, in case you wondered. Anyhow, war in general was not over for the Bolsheviks. In fact, they declared war on the Cossacks in the south on the 9th. The 12th saw fighting between Cossacks and Bolsheviks on the River Don at Rostov, and the 14th, the Bolsheviks occupied Rostov. Also this week, they defeated General Lav Kornilov twice north of Kharkov. And the week ends with two more notes. Romania signed an armistice the 12th, and that same day, Joseph Caillaux, former French prime minister, was arrested for treason. He favored a negotiated peace with Germany. Jerusalem surrendered to the Allies. Russia may soon have official peace from the World War, but now there is no peace between the Bolsheviks and the Cossacks. Well, let's be honest, there was no peace anywhere. Taking Jerusalem provoked the ringing of bells in Rome, but it wasn't peace. There were millions of men fighting on the Western Front alone. And the British War Cabinet says it will need at least 1 million more to fight an offensive that maybe would bring peace. Lenin wants peace from the World War because he's already fighting internal wars, and they're obviously only going to get worse. Looking at it all, it really seemed that even if by some miracle the World War did end, war wasn't going to. The fighting would go on and on everywhere. That's what the future of the modern world looked like 100 years ago this week. If you want to learn more about Russia before the revolutions of 1917, you can click right here for our special episode about that. Our Patreon supporter of the week is Choo Choo. I am grateful that you choose to make this project what it is today. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.